This week, shocking details of one Oregon teacher showing sexually charged content to first graders. The rising dangers of AI and a photo scandal rocking one Pennsylvania school. And the Michigan legislature pushing progressive anti-family standards for public schools in their state. These stories and plenty more on deck this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome in to this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stegall. Now let's meet our panel. Some of the men and women behind the scenes at ReadLion.com. Michael Ryan is our executive editor. Adam Wittenberg is the deputy managing editor. And Valerie Cabana is a media contributor here at The Lion. Welcome to you, panelists. So, Adam, we start with you this week. A couple of different stories out of Pennsylvania. One being the failing schools, particularly in the Philadelphia area, pretty well known, but what is not apparently as well known to kids in failing schools in Pennsylvania is their availability to get out of them.
Yeah, it kind of reeks of something like a conspiracy because Pennsylvania does testing every year, and they put in writing in law that the schools that rank in the bottom 15% statewide on these annual tests have to notify parents, hey, your kid is in a failing school. And there's a scholarship available that you can apply for to get out of that school. Well, some researchers at the Commonwealth Foundation in Pennsylvania have found that many of these schools are not doing their duty to notify parents, or they're burying it so deep on the website that it's almost impossible to find.
You know, Michael, this is one of those things in Pennsylvania in particular because there's a governor there named Josh Shapiro who's largely considered one of the front runners for the next go-around of presidential nominations. School choice was one, though, that he'd promised when he ran as governor, didn't ultimately deliver. Politically speaking, this seems like something he would embrace.
Yeah, and school choice has so much promise, and apparently some people don't want to deliver on that promise. I mean, hiding the school failures so that the children don't know that, or their families don't know that the children go to other schools on the state, it's just unbelievable. I mean, are they just ashamed of their failures? Is it a backdoor, a passive-aggressive way to veto school choice? Would they rather the kids fail than have choice? I mean, it's just unbelievable. I think other states with school choice ought to look at this example and make sure that there are penalties in the law for people who obstruct access to school choice. There are laws on the books. It's a federal crime to obstruct access to an abortion clinic. There ought to be a federal crime for obstructing access to education itself.
Adam, there's another violently uncomfortable story. I'll let you give as much detail as you want at ReadLion.com, but it's a story that we have to cover nonetheless because it's happening. It's real. It's a public school teacher in Oregon of first graders. That's about all I can get out. I'll leave it to you to do the rest.
Yeah, it's absolutely despicable, but we have a documented story of a first grade teacher showing the class a video instructing them and talking about masturbation. And you almost can't make this up, but not only did the teacher, show it, obviously thought it was okay and positive. I mean, there's a line in there where it's like a grandmother instructing a child that it's okay to do this as long as you just don't do it in public. And I think these people are trying to sexualize youth from the youngest, most tender ages. And maybe the only redeeming thing I can say is that the head of the Springfield Public Schools elementary program, really, I admire her forthrightness in saying, I'm just going to read the quote here. She said, this content should never have been shared in your child's classroom, and I'm sorry students viewed this video. And that's the only positive thing I want to say, because unfortunately in some districts, I think they would have doubled down and said, what's your problem? This is basic human stuff. We want to sexualize children. They maybe wouldn't use that language, but what's wrong? It's their body and all their freedom and all that kind of stuff.
Valerie, this is one of those things that I hesitate to ask anybody to try to do, but get into the head of an adult trying to talk to children about themes like this. It's perplexed me time and again. Is it something dark and perverse? Is it something to just simply political thinking into young people's impressionable minds? What drives this, could you imagine?
I think there are several different things to consider here. Some people actually believe that we should be teaching first graders these things. Now, if you ask me, I don't know who in their right mind would think that it's okay that we teach first graders something to this caliber. The video that was shown in class is actually attached to this article at readline.com, so if you're interested in watching it, go ahead and watch it. This teacher has been placed on administrative leave, but I'm asking the question, why weren't they fired immediately?
Yeah, and Michael, I don't understand, again, it's useless to try to understand why any adult thinking person would believe this acceptable. In what scenario? I try to creatively get there. Valerie took a stab at it. How about you?
Well, I think it's indicative of a belief among some in public education that the kids belong to them and not to the parents. Mm-hmm. I mean, this video showed this cartoon boy talking to the camera about how sometimes his penis, quote, stands up in the air and it feels good when I touch it, while an erection shows through his clothes. The woman's voice replies, when your penis stands up, it's called an erection. Girls also have a private part that they may want to touch because it feels nice, and it goes on to name that part. This was totally age inappropriate and apparently not district approved. And like Adam, I applaud the leaders of the district for standing up to that.
Michael, we'll stay with you on a story on a Christian university that's been hassled pretty aggressively by the Department of Education, and I don't know, it appears that maybe now that there's a regime change in Washington, D.C., could that have been the catalyst for this next story?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a vendetta. The U.S. Department of Education, under this regime, disallowed the Grand Canyon University, or it may have even predated this regime, but it disallowed Grand Canyon University in Phoenix its nonprofit status. But not only that, they went on to fine the school $38 million for allegedly misleading students on some costs. The Secretary of Education in this regime also threatened to shut it down. It reminds me of the Chevron doctrine that for 40 years has held that courts will defer to government agency bureaucrats on the interpretation of laws. Well, thankfully, that doctrine, the Chevron doctrine, was overturned recently by the U.S. Supreme Court, and certainly none too soon.
Adam, do you know much more about this story in terms of whether you believe the Department of Justice specifically targeted this university because they are a Christian university? Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I do think some of the changes may have preceded the current administration, but when the school, I think basically they were a private school, had financial trouble, were sold to, were a nonprofit, were sold to a profit, or converted to for-profit status temporarily to get their financial house in order. And some of that may have happened in the previous administration. But then under the current administration, they said, we want to go back to being a nonprofit. And I do think they were hassled and given a hard time because they're one of the largest Christian schools actually in the country.
Valerie, we'll turn to you for another uncomfortable story. Sorry, but it seems like we're full of them today at readline.com. And this goes back to Pennsylvania. And now a photo scandal. And this is something that I think specifically young women, not exclusively young women, but young school-aged girls in particular, we're hearing increasingly are becoming victims of AI photos, doctored, digitally created to put them in graphic situations or make them appear to be naked when they're not in fact real. They're manufactured through artificial intelligence, but they're being passed around, and it's a real problem.
Yeah, over 50 students were exploited at Lancaster Country Day School in Pennsylvania so badly that they had to cancel class. They had to shut things down until they could investigate what happened. Parents are raging about this because this apparently could have been prevented. It seems like there had been some arising issues in the times leading up to this, but it wasn't shut down quick enough to where these were released by a male student. And to touch on that a little bit, I think that's a parenting issue. We need to be teaching our children that they should not be engaging in this type of behavior. Does that mean that they're not going to? No. But do you think that this person's parent ever taught them, don't do this? they might not have. And so it's really important that we bring awareness to this. As AI is growing, this is something that is only going to continue increasing. We need to use it in a way that is honorable to ourselves and to others, because it can be used for good. But this story is absolutely horrific.
It's an interesting philosophical question, Michael, I've heard debated before. AI and illicit images generated by AI, because they are manufactured and not in fact real, does that make them pornographic or illicit in nature? Your thoughts?
The answer is yes. And these can be very realistic. So, the school did not step up to the plate, period. They didn't notify the parents. They didn't notify the police. They didn't notify Child Protective Services. And perhaps that's why the head of school and the board president have resigned. But to your question, Chris, this is a red lights with siren warning to every school administrator across the country, and frankly, every adult, that teens cannot be trusted to know what a weapon of mass destruction AI can be. And frankly, I think we need new laws to catch up with this.
Yeah, Adam, I'd ask you to jump in on that. I don't know yet, because it's so new, how one reins this in or manages it, either through legislation or as an administrator of a school. What do you recommend?
Yeah, well, Valerie's absolutely right that it's a parenting issue, that parents shouldn't just trust their kids with technology, certainly with AI, although I think many just let them do what they want. And you're also right. Fortunately, Pennsylvania has a law that's just about to take effect in about a month that will make using AI to create images of pornography with children, child pornography. It will be an actual child pornography crime. I believe South Dakota has also passed a law. So just like Michael was saying, this is a warning. And Valerie, to parents and also to lawmakers to get with the times and to understand that, unfortunately, if this is left unchecked, will become more common.
And a running theme of today's show, all these stories, by the way, you can always check out at readline.com. But, Michael, another running theme is another attack on the family. Outside agendas coming in and hitting the family hard up in Michigan.
Well, it's certainly seen that way by critics. Michigan Democrats are proposing revising sex ed standards in the state. House Bill 6068 would do that. It would remove family life and family planning from the standards. It'd be walking back a requirement to teach abstinence as a positive lifestyle. It replaces local clergy with community health professionals on local sex education advisory boards, and removes a prohibition against public schools distributing a family planning drug or device, which is kind of a red flag there. It's like if Planned Parenthood had its own school. The sponsor of the bill says it will enable students to make healthy choices for themselves and the relationship, but it ignores the healthiest choice of all, which is abstinence. They're talking about risk reduction with sexual activity rather than risk avoidance, and besides the fact that it really clashes with the morals of many families.
Valerie, when you talk about kids in the public square, whether it's legislatively out of many state capitals or whether it's in public school, starting to feel increasingly like if you have a certain set of values at home, they're going to be under attack when the kids are sent out.
Yeah, and we're seeing this increasingly. You're seeing it in small towns, you're seeing it in big cities. No one is not at risk to be exposed to these types of things. And just to be honest, sex ed doesn't need to be progressive, and abstinence is a good thing that we should teach children. I mean, one thing here is talking about the options if you do get pregnant. And what is that option? We all know that they're referring to abortion, and that is extremely inappropriate to be talking to high school students or even middle school students about, because we know that abortion ends a life. The truth is you shouldn't be having sex if you're not ready to be a parent, which is why we should be practicing abstinence in high school.
Panel, thanks so much for all these stories today. Now, before we close, we always like to ask the group their favorite stories of the week, a particular story that stands out to them they'd like you to check out at readline.com. Valerie, we start with you.
So this is not a happy story, but I want to bring awareness to it because it is a really big deal that we need to be aware of and wary of. And that is an Ohio teacher who has been charged with a felony for slapping a 7-year-old student. But this student wasn't just any student. It was a special needs, nonverbal autistic kid who couldn't even tell her mom if she wanted to what was happening in this school. And so the only reason that the mom found out was because other people who saw it happen told her. And so this is a heartbreaking story. There is a video up on The Lion that you can go watch. It is sad, though, and I'm just going to put it right out there in front. We need to be aware that these things can happen. Stay on the lookout for any behavioral changes in your children. Be in open communication with them if you can. This student in this case couldn't be, so you know what's happening in their school and what they're walking through every single day.
Yeah, so important. Many of these stories you won't read anywhere else were it not for readlion.com. Adam, your favorite?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with the first graders that were shown this inappropriate video in the state of Oregon. And I think it's just a warning sign that I pray and hope this is the only incidence of this happening and it never happens again. But I don't have confidence to say that. And kind of like what Valerie was saying, parents in particular, if your kids are in public school, need to be very much hands-on and attentive and aware of what your kids are being taught, or if they come home and say something, go ahead and investigate or be more skeptical. Don't just drop your kid off and think everything's going to be fine.
Michael, your story of choice this week.
Yeah, we have a story just went up this morning about a new study that shows that school choice, and in particular religious school choice, actually has the capacity to reduce crime and especially rape and suicide on campuses. So I found that very interesting, and it's something that's a lot of us intrinsically believe, but now we put a study to it.
Important, big stories that you can follow and catch only at readlion.com. That will do it for us this week. Thank you, panel. Be sure to keep up to date on all the latest news every day. Stories like these and so many more at readlion.com. For all of us at the Lion, thanks for downloading the show, and we'll see you next time.